In this video, we're going to explore our grading system and how it varies from a traditional grading system. We're using a modified version of standards-based learning. You may have heard of this as standards-based grading. It's essentially the same idea, except we're calling it standards-based learning as the focus is on learning and not the grading itself. So what is standards-based learning? Well, it's a system of reporting student proficiency against well-defined essential standards for a course. So in other words, we have these standards that we have set up in advance, and we're measuring student performance against those standards. In a traditional grading system, we're measuring those against percentage of things correct. So this whole journey started when we asked ourselves some questions. What should our grades communicate, and do they do that? Well, our thought was our grades should communicate what students actually know. As we looked more at our grades, they necessarily didn't. It got really sketchy when we got to grades of B and C because we had many different varieties of B. Some kids that had a B did that because, well, they didn't do too well on the assessments, but they did their homework. Or we had kids that didn't do their homework, but did really well in the assessments. Under our traditional grading systems, those kids got the same grade, but they had various levels of knowledge. We wanted to make sure that those kids that knew more material were being rewarded for that. It's not about compliance, about doing what we asked them to do. It's about learning the material. Is the grade more important or the knowledge of the material? Again, this is a very easy question to answer. Clearly, as a teacher, the knowledge is more important than the grade. But do our students see it that way? For them, it was about the grade. It was, I got a B, I got an A, versus I knew how to do this, 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 and this. And why do we even use percents? I read an interesting book over the winter break where they talked about the advent of percents had to do with the advent of computer grading systems. And some computer programmers somewhere along the way decided that 90, 80, 70, and 60 were good cutoffs for grades. So arbitrarily, someone had decided that 90% would be an A, and we've been using that for the last 20, 30 years. So think about this though, if we use those standard grades, 90%, 80%, 60%, 70%, 60%, 60% of our possible grades are failing grades. A kid that gets 10% of the material is weighted the same as a kid that's got 58% of the material right. It doesn't seem fair that those are that level. And not only that, if you think about a B is from an 80 to an 89. According to your grading scale, those kids are basically weighted the same. So if a student got a B in our class last year, do we know anything about what they actually know? Simply put, no, we didn't. We didn't know if they were able to solve equations correctly. We didn't know if they were able to use the distributive property, any of that stuff. So we decided that we needed to make a little bit of a change. So with that in mind, we decided standards-based learning was probably a good approach for us to try. Here's the reasons we decided that standards-based learning would be appropriate for Algebra 1. Number one, it gives grades more meaning. We don't really know what a B is, but if I have a grade where I can see that a kid knows 7 skills, I know what skills he knows, and I know what skills he doesn't. It provides a clear picture of what they actually know. Instead of just arbitrarily grading kids, we can say they have these skills mastered, these are ones that they're still working towards mastery. It sets high expectations. We are expecting all of our students to meet our standards. We're expecting all of our students are capable of reaching that A level. Our Algebra 1 curriculum is set up very well for this. It's a very skill-based class. Yes, we have extension questions. However, they're very set skills. Do students know how to factor? Do they know how to solve a linear equation? Do they know how to graph a quadratic equation? These are very set things that are an easy yes or no as far as mastery goes. It allows us as teachers to more readily adjust instruction. If we have a group of kids that are struggling with one particular standard, we might put them together and give them some individualized instruction. While the other kids are ready to move on, we might give them some different instruction. Or if we find out that the entire class is struggling with the standard, then we need to stop and reteach the material. It communicates student proficiency to all stakeholders. That includes teachers, students, parents, and administrators. We can tell you what they know. We can tell you what they don't know. It forces students to improve. If you want the grade, you have to show mastery. If you don't want the grade, fine, but if you want that grade, you've got to make sure that you know the material. The focus is on learning rather than the grading game. It's not compliance. It's not, well, I did my homework, I showed up, so give me the grade. It's more about knowing enough material. And the last one is really the key. It's all about feedback. All right. It's about giving information out to everyone that's involved to make sure that we're on the same page. And for those reasons, we decided standards-based learning would be a good approach in Algebra 1. So how is this going to look? How are we going to be graded? The reality is we're not truly standards-based learning. It's more of a modified version because we do have to assign a letter grade at the end of the semester and the quarter. So we can't give a report card that says we've mastered these skills. I know elementary school, that's a completely different process. But for high school, we have to assign that grade because there's a GPA that's calculated. And we know that colleges are going to look at that. So what we've done is we've created a system where we've used the principles of standards-based learning, which is reduced reliance on compliance grades, homework completion, and such, and more emphasis on mastery of material. So what we've done is created 6 categories. One is formative assessments. These are practice. Things like homework, exit slips, entry slips, just random data that we find about kids. That if we're, observational data, we see that this student knows linear equations very well, we can put that information in the gradebook saying at this level or at this particular point in time, we believe this student is ready to go, that they know the material and are prepared for the assessment. The assessments, again, are the cumulative assessments of all the material. All right. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to put that in as a 0%. It technically doesn't count, but it will be used when we get down to this category. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. This category here. Eventually, we're going to calculate a summative assessment grade. So the assessments are used to calculate this grade. You'll see an example of that in just a few minutes. This 5% here is the mathematical practices. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy about Common Core, and I think a lot of it has to do with textbook companies have created the materials, and then we're set on these methods. And that's not really the heart of Common Core. To me, it's the 8 mathematical practices. These 8 practices right here are things that we expect students walking out of Lincoln Way are going to be able to do. We know that at the end of the day, when we're talking about 5-10 years from now, they might not remember how to factor. That's reality. If you don't use it regularly, you're going to lose the skill. However, we do know that we want our kids to be able to do these 8 things. That if they're successful at these, they're going to be successful at any career. These are not just math-related skills, but skills that most people use pretty regularly. So we're going to use information, observational data, to assess where kids are at in the mathematical practices. In addition to that, we have homework. That's a pretty standard thing. You'll notice it's worth 5%. It is completion, so there is some component of a compliance grade, but it's been minimalized. So here we're going to take that homework, though, and transform it a little bit. It's not just, oh, I turned in my homework. It's you're going to turn the homework in, and we're going to give you feedback on where you are. Are you proficient with that? Are you excellent with it? Do you need some work, or do you need a lot of help with the material? We can tell just based on turning that homework in. Then we get to the summative assessment category, and we're going to talk about what a 4 is and a 3 is in just a minute here. But if we find out that all of the skills, all 10 of them roughly per quarter, you're at a 4. That means that for that assessment category, the summative assessment category, the 80%, we're going to put 100% in the gradebook. You know it. You got the material. Then we could be in this category here, 95. If you, let's say 80% of the targets, so of 10 targets, 8 out of 10 are at least at a 3, and you also have 7 out of 10 at a 4, then for us, that feels like A-level work, 95%. A B would be a 70% at a 3, and half of your targets at a 4. You're proficient in the majority of material. You're excellent in half of it, but not quite at that A level. A C is very similar to a B, except we don't hit that requirement of 50% of targets at a 4. That's the difference between B and a C. D is a 50% is proficient, and then an F would be less than 50% at a 3 or higher. Throughout the course, we are going to do skill checks, which are we call them spiraling questions. It's just make sure that the material is being retained, that our students still have learned that material. We will prepare them in the practice sets for the same type of questions that are on the assessment. So there's not going to be any surprises about what's on the assessment, just to make sure that the skills haven't gone away. That's going to count for 10% of the grade. So let's talk about that 80% and how do we actually calculate it. So these are the Q1 standards. Now on this document, we've listed out the 10 main things that we're going to do for Q1. And we've also listed out what sections those go for. So standard 1, interpret figures and graphs, is section 1. It will appear on assessment 1. Same thing with standard 2 on assessment 1 and so on. So these right here are grouped together. On the first assessment, we're going to assess those first 4 standards. Then on the second assessment, we're up to standard 5 and 6. And then 3, 4, and 5 will be standard 7 and 8. And really 5 is going to be the most important for these last 4 because that's we're going to use the most recent data on these. So these kind of right here, 3 and 4, are essentially practice to get ready for the big summative assessment. Now at the end of the quarter, we're going to take a look and figure out where the kids are at. We've broken this down based on our 10 standards. 10 standards at a 4 is a A+. 8 at a 3 or higher is an A, as long as 7 are at a 4. And a B is 7 at a 3 or higher, and 5 at a 4, and so on. Just as a quick example here, in this particular case, this student had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 standards that were 3 or 4, proficient or higher. And of those 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those are at a 4. In our grade book, that student will get a 95% for the summative assessment category. In the second example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 standards at a 3 or a 4. But if we look at the numbers right here, we only have 5 at a 4. So that's not quite A-level work because we're proficient, but we're not excellent at those remaining ones. And in this example, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 at proficient, but we aren't at excellent level for that. So proficient means we're ready to move on, but we're not quite at that excellent level. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those at a 4. So that's, in our view, C-level work as far as the assessments go. And that's what would go in that assessment category. Now, again, we do offer reassessment that at some point we look at the end of the quarter and we're like, you know what, gosh, I really need to do better on standard 9. I know I can do better on that. We do offer those opportunities to reassess. So in part 2 of this exploration of our grading process, we're going to take a look at what is a 1, 2, 3, and a 4, and also what is this going to look like in the grade book.